say apartheid, the first thing that may come to your mind is the racial apartheid in South Africa, where through racially segregated spaces, opportunities, neighborhoods, etc., a white minority colonized, controlled, and ruled over a country with Black majority while holding them as inferior second-class citizens through signs like this, which reminds us of our own very Jim Crow era in the US, when racial segregation was enforced through signs like this. When I say sexual or gender apartheid, I am referring to a similar system, institutionalized and bureaucratic system that separates women from men, holds them inferior to men, and treats them as second-class citizens, while preventing them from engaging in certain activities in public, like singing, dancing, going to a sports stadium, sometimes biking, and most recently in Afghanistan, having your voice heard, even reciting the Quran. In order to enforce this misogynist and sexist system called racial or gender or sexual apartheid, there is a need for a visible sign. For Islamic fundamentalist regimes like the Taliban in Afghanistan or the Islamic Republic in Iran, mandatory hijab or compulsory veiling seems to be doing the job just fine. Through signs like this, Islamic dress code is a shell for your inner pearl, or that you cannot enter this premises without the hijab, or that you need to comply with the dress code, and seriously, do not bring wild animal into the premises, which sometimes come into the same sentence. So, it's very easy for people to think, or be tempted to think, that this is just people's cultures, or this is just how people have always been historically in these particular parts of the world. When I say hijab, you might imagine a hijabi woman in the Western world, in North America or in America, who has a choice between wearing a hijab or not wearing a hijab. Well, by all likelihood, I can say that she will face discrimination, racialization, racism, xenophobia, or stereotypical assumptions about her supposedly undermined agency and autonomy as an oppressed woman. But context matters, and the context that I'm talking about today is theocratic contexts of Taliban regime in Afghanistan and the Islamic Republic in Iran, where there is no choice in wearing or not wearing the Islamic dress code for women. And there are detrimental, if not deadly, consequences for not wearing the hijab, from receiving a citation ticket, to having your car confiscated, to losing your job, to getting arrested, beaten, tortured, raped, or even burned by acid. And all of these examples have happened in these contexts. So let's see how accurate is the assumption that these people have always been veiled, or that it's their culture to be veiled. This is a photo of 1 out of 10 women's associations and feminist groups who were heavily involved in the constitutional revolution of 1905 to 1911 in Iran, which, by the way, was the first rise for democracy in the entire global South, namely Asia, Africa, and Latin America. And as you see, not even one of them is veiled. Here is Queen Soraya Tarzi of Afghanistan in 1928, who unveiled in public one day, and with that scarf threw away the label of second-class citizenship and sexual apartheid, and inspired many women. Many women followed suit after her. And here is Iranian women parliamentarians in the 1970s, before the Islamic Revolution of 1979, when Islamists took power. And as you see, nobody is veiled. And here are photos of my own family. On the right top, the little girl is my grandmother, who is 5 years old at the time. It's in the 40s. The bottom, my grandmother and my aunts, all university educated, in the 60s, posing for the photo. Nobody is veiled. And on the left, my mom is the little girl who ended up becoming a petrochemical engineering, graduated from one of the best technical universities in the Middle East, with this pink shawl on her. And here's the 70s. And as you see, nobody is veiled. And many women in Egypt, in Turkey, in Iran, throughout the years, participated in this unveiling movement. And they sought to close the gap of gender inequality and patriarchy that was reproducing itself through the separation of genders implemented through mandatory veiling. And this was cloaked within the ideology of protecting women, which, as we know, has no scientific evidence, but has a name. The rape culture, yes. To this day, we believe that women who dress more conservatively are somehow immune to sexual assault. Thanks to decades of feminist research and a scholarship, we now know that that is a myth, and that sexual assault is about power of control and not your sexuality being provoked and unleashed by someone or something sexy. And by the way, if it's our culture, why do we have to receive a ticket for not doing it? Or does it have to be enforced through the law? Why wouldn't we do it automatically? Let me tell you a story to make this more sensible. This is me, extremely happy. It's the first day of school for grade 2 at the entrance of a flower shop with holding bouquets, which of course my mom thought I should buy 2 bouquets, one for the second grade teacher and one to thank the first grade teacher. Very Persian. I'm standing there and I'm extremely happy. You can see that in my face. But there's something that you don't see in the photo, and that's my uncertainty and confusion. I'm confused about why I need to be covered from head to toe, while boys can go to school in normal clothes. I'm confused about why there are no boys in my school and they have to go the afternoon shift after we leave the school. I'm also confused as why my mom and I should sit in the back of the bus when my father and grandfather sit in the front. And I was also confused that when my parents got divorced, why the custody automatically went to my father, even though my mother was a sober, independent, financially independent, educated woman. And they never enjoyed the same social and political rights. You might ask yourself, why didn't you remove it, goddammit? Why didn't you just rip it away and go to school? I couldn't, because if I did, I wouldn't have received an education. I would have been arrested even walking down the street. Speaking of an arrest, I need you to fast forward 6 years when on a beautiful summer day, I am a teenager, 14-year-old, wearing a light makeup, walking down the road. Actually, I was trying to get off a cab and then cross the street when suddenly a mini bus that was like a van and said morality police on it, pulled up next to me, and 3 people ran outside, grabbed me, restrained me, kidnapped me, and shoved me inside the van without explaining what I had done. They were just calling me names and swearing at me. I was terrified. I was shaking in fear, and on those days, nobody had a cell phone to call their parents to say what was happening. As I was drowning in fear, I remembered that I was wearing a light purple eyeshadow, and I reached my eyelid with a corner of my scarf, tried to wipe it away, maybe to receive a lesser sentence. When the driver spotted me in his rear mirror and started humiliating me and mocking me, rubbing his own finger back and forth, saying, "You shouldn't have worn an eyeshadow, bitch. Why are you doing this now?" I stopped what I was doing and felt a lump in my throat. The car started. We went forward. They attacked and did the same thing to another girl and another girl and another girl. And one of the girls had to abandon her 5-year-old sister on the streets as we left, and she screamed, and they beat her until she fainted. We reached a police station called Center to Combat Social Corruption, and were held in a cell with no water, no food, no access to bathroom, short ceiling, and a smelly soiled carpet. The rest of that story is perhaps a story for another day, but I need you to fast forward 22 years, when in 2022, a 22-year-old Kurdish Iranian girl called Mahsa Jina Amini was beaten to death in the hands of the morality police, the same police force who had arrested me. Mahsa's tragic death reignited embers of anger and frustration, and thus came out Iranian people in huge numbers, and inspired by the Kurdish movement, arguably the most progressive feminist movement in the Middle East, said, "Jen jian azadi, zan zindagi azadi," woman, life, freedom. Chanting slogans like that, dancing bodies without the hijab, burning the hijabs in bonfires, was heavily and violently cracked down upon by the theocratic state, armed to its teeth. 3 weeks later, 500 dead, tens of thousands arrested, tortured, imprisoned, few hundred blinded by bird shots, and a few executed. UN fact-finding mission a year later issued a statement saying that rape was weaponized against Iranian women protesters for saying, "Woman, life, freedom." Unlike ever before, many artists, athletes, academics came out and showed solidarity with Iranian women. Great. But not all of them was able to capture the depth of the disaster that had happened, and a veiled woman had been killed for showing a few strands of hair. That, in fact, she had been killed for being a woman. One hijabi celebrity tweeted, "States and men's hands off women's bodies." True and a very sweet statement, but that felt like a slap in Iranian Afghan woman's face. It was like saying all lives matter in the middle of a Black Lives Matter protest, completely canceling the experiences of Black folks getting disproportionately harmed in the hands of the police and law enforcement compared to other races. Some people expressed surprise that a Muslim majority women in a Muslim majority country were burning their hijab. Unlike other women who are never categorized by their faith, somehow when it comes to us, we become this rigid and fixed category of Muslim women, this monolithic category, while other people have many other temporal, dynamic, ever-changing identities. For example, and our problems equally become our cultural and faith problems rather than our social problems and political problems. For example, when in the West we see the gender wage gap, we don't call it Christian problem or American problem. We call it gender wage gap. It's an inequality problem. But when it comes to us and we want to hear about inequality happening to women, it suddenly becomes untouchable. It becomes our culture. And what happens in the process is that our oppressors use the argument of cultural relativism to erect a fort around the practices that they're doing, make it untouchable to the outside world by concealing coercion and faking consent, and destroy any possibility of solidarity from the outside world. And some people, maybe some of you, are afraid of being accused of promoting Muslim phobia. And I refrain from using the word Islamophobia because Islam is not a person. Islam is an idea. It's not a race or an ethnicity, despite the fact that Muslims get racialized in this country. We should be able to critique the hell out of ideas and rip them apart, hate them, love them, whatever we want to do with them. That's what I teach my students every day. But we shouldn't hate people. So we should criticize racialization and hate towards Muslims while preserving our rights to critique the hell out of Islam or Islamic practices. So you might ask yourself, why are you telling all this? I'm not telling you this to feel morally superior. I know some of you might think, oh my God, thank God I don't live there. I'm so glad I don't live in those countries. I'm not here for your catharsis. I don't need to be saved or rescued, and I'm not here to amplify those women's voices for that. I'm here to hold you accountable. I'm here for solidarity. I'm not asking for an invasion or a rescue plan from governments. I'm here to hold you accountable, to come out of your comfort zones of stereotypes and indifference, and that's not my problem, and that's their culture. When you think about feminism and equality, I need you to think beyond your county and your city and your town and your country. Today is 1,117 days that Afghan girls have not gone to school. Think about that number. Join me. Go beyond subjectivities fragmented by identity and geopolitics. Join me, stand with me and say, woman, life, freedom. Say it with me, woman, life, freedom. Woman, life, freedom. Woman, life, freedom. Join the fight of ending gender apartheid. Thank you.